Hirai, how can you come here if you can run? How can you come here? Pussy nothing. Run can kill you. Kill a man. Run can kill you. Kill a man. Hey, day, 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 day. Silogan. Hey, day, 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 day. Silogan. I can feel you. Feel a man. I can feel you. Feel a man. Hey, pull up, pull up. Hey, pull up, gorilla. Hey, pull up, pull up. Hey, pull up, maka.
One Africa, one continent, one currency. That is the inevitable future of the continent of the beloved Africa. It is certain, definitely, regardless of the ABAHAMBE, foreigners this and foreigners that, the deadline has finally arrived. It is the 30th of June. As we've all seen, there has been marches like almost in all corners of the country, and we've seen that Somali tuck shops, Pakistani cell phone repair shops, everything that is foreign was shut down. So the question is, what now? After the 30th of June. Tomorrow is the 1st of July. So what then? I want to start off this episode by introducing maybe a certain scenario that if you would just picture that and we try and see what the animosity and what is perceived as anarchy may be derived from. Imagine you have a family, a household, and for the longest of time in this household there has been unemployment. The father is not working, the mother is a housewife. There's 3 kids, 3, 4, maybe 5 kids in this household. Just a small example that I want to demonstrate that could possibly bring us better understanding as to what the ordinary South African could probably be going through at the moment. The father's been unemployed for the longest of time, and eventually he gets employed. 30th, 31st comes, it's month end, he gets paid, he comes home, and he opens up the door with some baggages of groceries, and he hands them over to his wife, who is the mother of the household, and she eventually prepares a meal. And you can already imagine, in a poverty-stricken home, or disadvantaged home rather, the joy, the overwhelmness of certainty that we're going to have a decent meal for the day. And as we sit around maybe the heater or the fire inside the house, the mother comes out of the kitchen and announces that, can we please just go and wash our hands? I'm about to dish. And the father then says, please wait. Let me, just give me a moment. He opens up the door and he stands at the door and he shouts to all the neighbors, can you please come, I invite you all to my house. We about to have a decent meal. My wife has cooked us a nice meal. Can you imagine the anger, the resentment that can cause within the household? Because everyone has been imagining for such a day to come eventually, and before they could actually help themselves, the father then invites other people into the house to first serve them and forgets about the interests or the needs of the family or immediate needs of that family. I'm making this because I want to paint a picture at the end of what I'm about to discuss with you today. And maybe you could come up with your own conclusion as to, whether you are for or you are against the ABAHAMBE situation or anti-illegal undocumented foreigners, could put it that way. I'd like to welcome you to We Abantu podcast with myself. My name is Uluyolo Mqawu. This is not just any podcast. It's more than just a podcast. It is an engagement hub, an instrument dealing with real commentary, real people and real analysis, and the state of the South African social, economic, political and social issues affecting us South Africans as a nation. Engage with us in dissecting and road mapping the future we want as South Africans through dialogue and interviews, both in English and our very own vernacular that is more appealing to us as South Africans, because I believe what I have to offer is morally, or basically not what is in the main as per se, but what is happening on the ground, the conversations that we have in taverns, pubs, on corners, conversations we have in a taxi or a bus, the conversation that we have as ordinary people ekasi and in the village somewhere as Lalini, the unhappiness of the current state of our economy, the current state of our social issues, I would put it that way. So let's dive into it. So the whole ABAHAMBE situation really started. It has been going on. It's something that has been, even from the Thabo Mbeki era. It came in the Zuma era, and now it's also again in the Cyril era. But it was something that has been in the making over the course of the years. I would say maybe over 20 years that it has been happening. But more recently, it came down to an Igbo king that was coronated within Kukombo a few months back, and that really rattled South Africa. It really rattled locals, whereby a king or someone could come and claim kingdomship in a sovereign state that has its traditional leaders. You have Abo King Misizulu, you have Abo Inkosi Ustawu, you have Inkosi Abathembu, Utalinjebo. You have a lot of kings, even within the Tswana and the Pedi communities, that you would look as an ordinary person and ask, how did we get to a point whereby someone would come and claim kingdomship where there is already an established kingdom, basically? So it then led to different forms and formations and back and forth of people orchestrating these things slowly but surely, which led to the whole ABAHAMBE now as a movement, if I could put it. Now, I want you to bear with me, right? If you could look at the situation like this, a lot of people currently are only saying foreigners are taking jobs. Capitalists, which are the business community, favor foreigners over South Africans. Spaza shops are being owned by foreign nationals and so on. As much as that could be essentially the cause or in the center of everything, I think to only keep it to that would be downplaying the seriousness of this issue, because South Africans are defending an identity. South Africans are basically, they're fighting because from what it looks like, we are being defaced to a certain point whereby we are being attacked and nobody is picking it up, or everyone is just downplaying it. But I can guarantee you, if a And when South Africans do not stand up for what they believe or how they perceive the future of their country should be, then definitely in the next 30 years' time to come, there will be no South Africa. I can guarantee you that. And I'll explain as I go along why I say that. Nevertheless, we have different leaders who have a lot to say, basically, about what and how South Africa should be done. There's one leader in particular that I watched a show on, PLO Lumumba, who's bashing and says that he has wrote a letter to President Ramaphosa to basically tell him to deal with these shirtless guys who are causing anarchy and drinking in Telezi and all those things. I feel like South Africa is at the crossroads whereby some people or some nations should take a step back. And in taking a step back, that will allow us as South Africans to fix and to come to terms of how and where we want to direct the future of our country. It doesn't help for other people to step in when it suits them, because probably they have family members or they have fellow countrymen who are being perceived in a different light in another state. Right. I want to take maybe one step back into history. Everyone has something to say now that South Africans are xenophobic. South Africans, everything, all sorts of things. Some I don't even want to mention the kind of voice notes that we get on WhatsApp of what South Africans really are in perception, of course. That we are lazy, we live in tin houses, we don't have land, we fail to sell tomatoes on the street to make a living. We are jealous of foreigners who do not live in squalor and occupy houses in close by to the city. Also with regards to taking South African women, South African men are stingy. Those are all the different things that if you could really take a moment and take a step back, you'd actually realize that it's the same as opening your door to a stranger then comes in and start judging you and how you run your household and starts criticizing you for being you in your own home whilst they are visitors and overstepping boundaries, basically. In 1990, Namibia got its independence from South Africa, former Southwest Africa. The first democratic president was Sam Uyona, I think. Now, this history, you can Google it wherever. It's very hard to find it. But from experiences of people who lived it, who tells the story, this is where I'm going to tell you from, basically. So a lot of people, when Namibia got its independence, President Sam Uyona created an immigration camp, if I could put it, and they literally went door to door looking for immigrants, whether you were legal, whether you were illegal, whether you had skilled or non-skilled labor. And in particular, when doing this, they kept people in concentration, or let me not say concentration camps, they kept people in these camps. And part of the strategy was to frustrate, and then people would voluntarily then say, no, I'm going home. And the buses were already there, right? So everyone or anything that was breathing that was not Namibian, basically, if you had domestic jobs, if you worked in a factory, all these small kind of things that doesn't necessarily need high intellect skill, you would be deported. And what they did, they kept people that worked in the health system, they kept people that worked in the education system, they kept people that had education, basically, in very strategic and key aspects of their economy. But nonetheless, they didn't just keep them. The deal was for you to forfeit your motherland status and become a full-blown Namibian citizen. So you had to default where you come from and accept this new status as a Namibian. And therefore, today we have quite a lot of people who are Xhosa, who are Zulu, who are Tswana. Some of us are our uncles, our aunts, who then forfeited their citizenship as South Africans, who remained in Namibia. And up until today, their offspring has become or naturalized as Namibians. Right. The reason why I'm making this analogy is that in 1994, I think the worst mistake that could have been done was not to serve the needs of the people at that time, but then sell us a picture of a rainbow nation. It's for all who live in it. And it could only have gone this far for people to start seeing the remnants of that blunder that was done, because now South Africa has become a nation that is about to be defaced, if I can put it that way, and defaced in the shape that so apart from just the economic aspect, or maybe let me say, and as part of the whole situation with our tuck shops, our economy, I remember a small or quite a portion of my life, I grew up in Cape Town, and I used to travel by train to the city because I was attending school close to town, then in town, and all of that. But in my upbringing, I remember how old people or grannies or tata used to sell sweets and peanuts and small things moving around the train with a semi-basket. And there would be times where law enforcement would barge into the train, and it would be chaos because they would confiscate whatever these people had, and on top of it they would also, for the most part of it, arrest anyone and everyone who was a hawker on the train or on the sideway of the train or on the sideway of the train station itself. I remember also during my time as a primary school kid in Cape Town, we used to go to the parade almost every Wednesdays and Saturdays, and you'd get there would be a market. And in most cases, because the dominant ethnic group that is Cape Town based is colored, or the Muslim community as well, they used to be the ones who would sell anything and everything basically on the parade. And that is how those people made a living for their families. Fast forward till today, it is very hard for a South African to get a permit to have a stall in town, being it at the Green Market Square, being it on the parade, being it next to the road. But wherever you go, whatever you see, it would always then be a foreign tuck shop or a foreign stall that they would sell a hawker and everything. My point exactly is that South Africans are law-abiding citizens by nature, because never ever in those times would a South African resist a law enforcement officer or intrude, overstep the bylaws of the city. But in today's world, you find that so many foreigners, and I'm not going to say documented or undocumented. Remember, I'm painting a picture here. You go to the station, right in front of the station, same as Cape Town, same as Belleville. Almost 99.9% of those people who are selling there are not South African. If you go to eThekwini at the taxi rank, from moving up the stairway to those containers where you find the salons and everything, 99.9% of those people are not South African. If you go to the parade, 90% of those people are not South African, and are especially no longer the Muslim or colored community of Cape Town. I'm not certain as to if this is a deliberate coincidence, but what I do know about it is that in any other country is safeguarded for local economy. Perhaps maybe I could also use Zimbabwe came with one most recently, where they said if you own a salon or whatever you own that can be done by Zimbabweans, 70% of that in 3 years' time should be handed over to Zimbabweans, and non-Zimbabweans can no longer then be dealing with salons and all those type of things. Ghana also most recently came through with that, and but the funny part, or what baffles, is that when South Africans do it, it's xenophobic. And I put my head on the chopping block that as a South African, there is no such thing as a xenophobic South Africa. Yes, there might be tribal indifferences, and indefinitely there is. But we've always found a way to live with one another, to coexist with one another in those differences. And we've learned not to overstep those boundaries. So that is just one of the things when it comes to the local economy. And the next thing would then go to in the townships. You'd find back in the days our Otabani or Otamkulubani would have a stall, or rather a tuck shop, spaza shop, and they would sell the immediate needs that you do not need to go to town or to a mall, if I could put it that way. And that is all that they sold. It was just that they sold. But today you find that an Ethiopian owns a tuck shop, and in the same tuck shop, these Ethiopians or Bangladeshi are selling alcohol. You would never find that in a normal South African society. We know where we buy alcohol, but today they are selling alcohol over the counter in the pretense of a spaza shop. So hence I'm saying South Africans are law-abiding citizens. And then you find someone who's non-South African comes and sees this law as something that they can just overstep. And they overstep it with confidence, because even our police, they buy alcohol over the counter, right? Where we would buy alcohol in the past would be in a shibin or in a tavern, or where a Mahrotman would usually go around when they knock off and stuff. There would always be maybe a lady who is just hustling a few cases of beer out of her kitchen, and they would sit in that yard and have a drink. Maybe umqombothi also. But you find that the shift that happened is that the current spaza shop owners are selling alcohol over the counter. Yes, we still have those ladies or those households here and there that kind of sells alcohol and that are not liquor registered to do that. They are being harassed by police. You find like a stack of 20 police vans and combis would come and shut down a house that is led by a single mother who is just trying to make a living for their kids, and not selling alcohol to kids but to grown people, mostly civilized people who were government jobs would go there, amahrotman, amatimer, and just want to have 2-3 beers. They shut them down. But just down the street, there is a non-South African person who sells drugs, mainly your mandrakes, your tek, your cat. Those are, and I wouldn't count weed, but mandrakes, tek, and cat. Those are your main, or iwunga in some parts of the country. Those are your main generational killers. You find that these people are selling these drugs, but they are hardly raided by the police. The police would rather harass someone who is a South African who is selling just to make a living and selling alcohol to adults and not kids. So I'm painting this picture because I want people to understand the frustrations that is happening in South Africa. Maybe there's a lot of media. There's mainstream media, there is social media, so there's a lot of different things that are happening, and me talking about it doesn't take away from what somebody has said or mentioned before, but this is me also painting the picture out of experiences and conversations that we have on a daily with other South Africans. So in a nutshell, government is failing its people, and it's failing its people by harassing its people, by arresting its people, by confiscating the means that its people are trying, and overlooking foreigners. And we are not sure what the agenda is basically about it, but the ripple effect is very constant, and we can feel it as South Africans. And I'm speaking now as a South African myself. So that is the economic part of the problem. And trust me, what I've said is not even 30% of the reality that is happening. So I'm sure somebody else can take it further even. However, now, immigrants are taking our jobs. Immigrants are taking our business. That is that part. Now you look at the seriousness apart from that. South Africans are taxpayers, first of all, right? And you have someone here who came through a study visa, asylum seeker, who is not meant to make business in this country. However, they come through in numbers. Now you find in your kasi, in your village, right, we have a clinic. Our clinics are operating probably from 8 up until 4, right? Those clinics are operating up until 4 o'clock. Now, healthcare or primary healthcare in South Africa is free. However, at the same time, it is not free because it is the taxpayers' money who pays for these things. In that, there's chronic illnesses. In that, there is the HIV and AIDS pandemic, which the ARV program has kept millions of people alive up until today. In that, there is birth, mothers and women giving birth. Now, if you are going to say anyone and everyone can just come into the country as they please, unaccounted for, and then you want to then portray that as a human right for them to actually demand some of these needs and services that our government has created, and not because the government has money, but because we are tax-paying citizens. So me paying tax and not probably using a public hospital doesn't exempt me from paying for primary health care that does not need to pay for their medication and whatever. So regardless, either way, my money still goes there. It does what it should do, and that is to take care of South Africans. Now, a lot of people come through the borders, especially just to give birth. A lot of people are in the country illegally, and they fall ill, and they cannot be turned away from a hospital or a clinic. God knows, in a good society or in a perfect world, that is how the world should work. You should not turn away someone who is ill or someone who is hungry. But then the question remains, on whose back are you riding? You're going to take my hard-earned, and mind you, I may not even go to the hospital or the clinic for 2-3 years, and I'm still paying that tax. However, somebody who's not paying that tax, who's here illegally, is getting to benefit from that. Now, I want you to not take me out of context. I'm using first-person narrative because when I say I mean South Africans. Exactly. There's a lot of things that I agree with. There's a lot of things I do not agree with how they are being dealt with personally, on a personal note. Because I have a lot of friends who are non-South African, but the fact remains that I am South African, and my future is here. My children and their children's future is here. Should this country go to waste tomorrow, a non-South African could easily pack their bags and leave. But where do I go as a South African? Because this is home for me. If this thing doesn't work, I'm doomed for life because I have nowhere else to run. And I think a lot of South Africans, if you may ask or want to understand, would they prefer to stay here or leave? A lot of us, we are fine here. We are fine. South Africa, we are all right here. We are okay. We have our struggles. We will sort them out, but we don't yearn to go to another state to make a living. A lot of us. And even those who leave, 10 years is a lot. They will be back. So we have a healthcare crisis at the moment. You go to the clinic, you go to the hospital, you get there 7 a.m. in the morning, you get help 3 a.m. the next day because there's an overflow of people. There's too many people. And put yourself in those shoes. I mean, just try and imagine a situation. And what's worse, from stories that we hear of people who's left, who's gone to Zimbabwe or other countries, if you come there and you are non-Zimbabwean, you have to pay for your medical fees. It comes back to the point where you ask yourself, if South Africa has to take care of everyone who comes in, legal or illegally, why are do we have these consulates in our country? Why do we have these embassies of different nations that are here and they are not taking care of their people? My take would then be, why don't Zimbabwe pay for their medical or primary health and for their residents who are in South Africa or anywhere else in the world? Why are they not being made to pay for these things? So it's one of those things whereby South Africans have to tense and be strong and just, and while everyone says that we have a good we have a democracy that works for the people. So also, so in a nutshell, it is not helping the manner in which government will then come and deal with the situation. A lot of people have been bashing the likes of Abo Jacinda, Abongizwe, Abomthakati, and many more who are not in the main in terms of this movement that's going on. Maybe let's look at the different politicians like Julius Malema, Clayton McKenzie, Ufikile Mbalula. It's very easy for those people to talk down on their own people because they must keep a certain decorum and diplomacy to other African nations or the world. But at the same time, they are not feeling what the ordinary man is feeling on the ground. They are not feeling what the ordinary man is feeling on the ground. And they are who they are because of the ordinary man in the ground. Yes, we want more than anything, we want a united Africa. But that should not be on the expense of South Africans. That is the issue. It cannot be that African leaders leave their citizens to flock into South Africa and not do anything about it. It is uncalled for. It is impossible to keep this boat floating. The other thing is also that as a South African, I go to the ballot, and when I cry and when I feel pain, I expect whoever that I crossed at the ballot for should be able to respond to my needs. But instead, we are being portrayed as xenophobic, as hooligans, as anarchists and all those type of words. But government is really failing to listen to the plea of the people, because why are we saying illegal foreigners and then we want to absorb illegality and make it legal? You have the human rights commissions, they are talking here, talking there, left, right and center. And it's all these different notions of people who don't really feel the depth of what's going on, who have all these beautiful comments and connotations that they make about this whole thing that is anti what is going on. But I wonder if the Human Rights Commission could one day say it is against human rights and it is a human violation for black people not to own the land. Like, has anyone ever engaged and invested their energy in fighting actually for what South Africans are yearning for? Because we want land. No wonder there's voice notes going around of people calling us dom cops and lazy people. We are fighting for South Africa that we don't even own because we don't have land. All these commissions and everyone else who is anti this so-called propaganda of xenophobia. How many times have black people asked for land? How many times have we applied for land and no one talks about it? Self-reliance, self-establishment, sustainability that we want as a nation. No one gets to talk about it. And when we talk about that, you can talk about anything else, but when you get to that point, you become unpopular in opinion. But the same people are very quick also to bash South Africans when they want to fight for at least the only thing that they have and that they see currently it's being taken away from them, and we are called as anarchists and all these type of things, and no one sits down and actually looks at the literal implication of this whole situation as to we don't have borders, our borders are duplicated, and our home affairs, the systems are not working. The systems have been duped by people who should be public servants, but they are self-serving at the same time. Our correctional facilities are overflowing with thousands of migrants. At whose expense is that again? Our hospitals, at whose expense is that again? People come in to give birth in South Africa for their children to get social grants. At whose expense again? So, as much as we want to sugarcoat and be nice and be cordial, diplomatic, the reality is these are the conversations that are happening on the streets, on the corners, in the taverns, in the taxis, and everyone has an issue with this. Everyone has something to say, and 90% of those people who are crying about the pain are not xenophobic because they have friends from all over Africa. But this plea was only to get to say, if you don't have papers, go back, come into the system legally, then we find a way to work forward. And then perhaps we find a way to make the system work before you even come back into the country. We might imagine maybe if we could say I think South Africa has more of a leadership crisis more than anything else. It has a leadership crisis because no one wants to say or do what is right. Everyone wants to sweep everything under the carpet, and we must always just be tense and strong, kuzolunga. And honestly, how long are we going to keep that notion bahane? Tomorrow is another day, shapfere kuzolunga. It can't always be that notion. I can imagine today is the 30th, right? And I saw on the news that early hours of the morning there was buses. The N1 was packed with buses. People going back to Malawi, people going back where. And I can't help but sit and think for myself, but this is almost like taking a washing basket that has got a lot of holes to a tap and pouring water expecting you are going to fill up this basket, but at the same time it's just leaking. Because the same way you are taking people out of the country, people who did not willingly, voluntarily go out of the country, but because of the situation they had to leave, they will just find their way back, because there's many creative ways. If there's no border, there's many creative ways to get back into the country and just do your thing again. So There's a 600 million that was spent today for peace, order, and calmness, and this swart gevaar of a notion that people are going to loot, people are going to kill other people. In essence, that is the same money that should be used for the past 3 months that this thing has been boiling over, to say, you know what, we are putting up a border. We are employing more BMA members. We are employing more security forces to patrol the border, because this is more also a fight for the sovereignty of the country. If you look at it, there's a lot of rebels in other parts of the continent, and if we do not have a border, can you imagine one day we just wake up and you find these bombs and guns, people are shooting each other, and all these people are just here to attack South Africa for whatever agenda they have? Because during the course of this whole few months that these things have been going on, for some reason there was a wake up, or forces just seemed to wake up and start attending to all these issues. And the border patrols, BMA was working overtime. How many illegal and illicit things they confiscated at the border? How many explosives that they got in different trucks that was coming into the country? And it makes me think also, I think a year or two ago, not so long ago, how many of these farms are being occupied by illegal or immigrants who actually are cooking drugs. Some of them, they also have, there was 100, I think, is it Asians or something, 100 people that were arrested because they were practicing as a military group, and then you didn't know what happened, and for some reason they were just released. And now, can you imagine the importance of the whole issue of illegal immigration and detecting to anyone and everyone who exits and who enters the country, rightfully so, to the T? And that is exactly to avoid things like that happen. From my side, from where I'm sitting, I don't want to lie, I'm anxious, because there could be a takeover of this country anytime. There could be bombs and guns and chaos at any time, because our law enforcement will be sleeping on the job, and they have allowed this mess to happen. From a personal note, I love people. I am 100% for the unity of Africa, but that unity of Africa cannot be one-sided on the expense of South Africans, while other people are not pulling their weight. The only way that Africa can unite is by teamwork, and it seems like our leaders want to play hero. There's no hero in this thing, where you find that the unison of Africa must come from South Africa. It cannot. It is practically impossible. If yes, South Africa is the only government that's got infrastructure and a working government that makes migration face this way, then let that domino effect then fall on the neighboring countries as well. Because it is uncalled for to think that South Africa can actually carry the entire continent. It is impossible, in my opinion. Asylum seekers, you can't say you are an asylum seeker if you jump 3, 4, 5 borders. Asylum seeker is to the nearest border. You understand? And indeed, you can't say you're an asylum seeker and you came through with that, and 23 years later you are still here, well established, and there's no war in your country. I take my hat off for leaders like your Kagame from Rwanda. He puts Rwandans first. He stands for Rwanda before anything else. I take my hat off for leaders. I don't know what's the name of the president, the current president of Namibia, Mama, but Namibia first before anything else. So I don't know what the plan is here, because even with our leaders, today they say this, tomorrow they say that when they get into power. Today is ABAHAMBE, tomorrow is do not. So you don't know what we don't know where we stand. I think it's time for younger leaders to emerge within the struggle. It's time for fresh ideas to emerge. And maybe to all those intellectuals out there, it's time for you to start thinking with two different hats on, because it seems like people forget where they come from in terms of you were nothing yesterday, today you have a PhD or you have a doctorate, a professoriate or whatever, MBA, and now you start to think differently because you must now not think like an ordinary person. You are an ordinary person first, in my view, before you become an intellect. So whenever you come to visit us in the villages and in the townships, where do you look, or till when do you want to be the only one who shines and being praised? You drive a nice car, you live in the city and all of that. Not that all of us are interested in those things, but I think it's fair that everyone be given a hearing and everyone be given a chance to express themselves. And it worries me when people want to diminish and speak bad about South Africans when they hit the streets with their knopkiris and some of them shirtless. But you forget, actually, that is how South Africa gained its independence. That singing and chanting that is happening there, that is not for fun, but there is a spirituality actually in its own, because that is how you get to interact with the spirit of the person next to you and find that unison and courage to take on a regime. We should never undermine a South African, whether in sports, whether in anything. When you find South Africans singing, you must just know that could be classified as a spirituality, because that's how we connect. That's how we speak to each other without speaking and feel what we feel and have a common purpose. And today, 30 years later, that's how we gained our independence. And also on a note that we live for people, we live with people, we live by people. South Africa was helped during its cry out or struggle. But what people seem to forget, that South Africans did not flee South Africa to go and settle. South Africans fled because they wanted to go and get help and come back into the country and fight. And that is the reality of things. So I don't know till when that gunpoint will be held on a South African to say that in your toughest times, you also came to Nigeria, you also came to Congo, you also came to all these places. It's a fact. But you must remember, our fathers and grandfathers, they were in concentration camps. And in those concentration camps, they were arming themselves to get back out and fight for their land. So maybe it's a conversation that the youth of Africa should have, because currently the AU and the PAP, Pan-African Parliament, there's not much that's happening because they still take orders from the UN and all these other places. So maybe it's time for more younger ideas and fresh ideas, because it is senseless to want to unite Africa from one direction. It is impossible, practically impossible. And the unison of Africa should first start with a free trade before a free movement of individuals. In conclusion, I think my point with the family that I made in the beginning regarding the father and the kids is that in reality, the first democratic president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, opened up the floodgates of heaven and invited everyone and said, this is a free country, this is for everyone who live in it, forgetting that it's eating its own children from beneath. In Afrikaans they say, hou die blink aan bo, maar as jy regtig kan kyk onder, as dit baie vrot. So dis nou die geval van Suid-Afrika wat ons nou oorleef. Onze mense het die werkie, onze mense het die rigting nie. Onze mense dwaal. Maar op een van die dag ons het leiers. Op een van die dag ons het mense wat ons voorstem. Wat as hulle onze stem soek, dan praat hulle met dieselfde stem wat ons praat. En die dag wanneer hulle in krag instap, dan verander hulle taal. Dis die probleem wat ons sit. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for taking your time and listening at me. I hope we will meet again. I hope we will get to talk and engage more on the platform We Abantu podcast with myself, Loyal Ngao. Thank you. Like, subscribe, and yeah, let's engage. Thank you so much.